The confrontation between federal authorities and the state of Maine over transgender athletes' participation in school sports has escalated into a significant legal and policy challenge. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has issued a 10-day ultimatum to Maine, demanding compliance with federal regulations after finding the state in violation of Title IX provisions regarding transgender athletes in girls' high school sports. This dispute emerged following President Trump's executive order in January, which explicitly banned biological men from competing in female sports. The order came with a clear warning that institutions failing to comply would lose their federal funding. The administration has taken a firm stance on enforcing this policy, leading to direct investigations of states and institutions that maintain different approaches to transgender athlete participation. The federal investigation revealed specific violations in Maine's educational system. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services detailed these findings in a formal letter, identifying 3 key entities in violation of Title IX: the Maine Department of Education, the Maine Principals Association (MPA), and Greeley High School. Title IX, a cornerstone of educational equality, prohibits discrimination based on sex in educational programs receiving federal funding, and the current administration's interpretation extends this to restrict transgender athlete participation. The proposed resolution presented to Maine includes several demanding requirements. The state must return previously received federal funding and implement comprehensive staff retraining programs. This resolution carries significant weight, as failure to accept these terms could result in referral to the Justice Department for enforcement action. The federal government has made it clear that they view compliance as mandatory, not optional. The tension between state and federal authorities became particularly evident during a White House meeting where President Trump directly confronted Maine's Governor Janet Mills. The exchange was notably confrontational, with Trump stating bluntly, "You're not getting any federal funding." Governor Mills's defiant response, "We'll see you in court," prompted an immediate federal investigation that resulted in the current findings of Title IX violations. The federal investigation cited specific incidents that formed the basis of their conclusions. One key example involved a transgender student from Greeley High School who won an indoor track championship. Another case centered on a transgender student from Maine Coast Waldorf School who participated in a girls' Nordic skiing race. These events were presented as concrete evidence of policy violations under the current federal interpretation of Title IX. Anthony Arkful, acting director of the Office for Civil Rights at HC, emphasized the federal government's position in a formal statement. He specifically addressed Maine's organizational structure, stating that the Maine Department of Education cannot avoid its federal obligations by delegating control of extracurricular activities to the Maine Principals Association. This statement directly challenges Maine's current administrative approach to managing school sports and activities. The Maine Principals Association has maintained a firm stance on their existing policy, which allows transgender students to compete in girls' sports. They base this position on the Maine Human Rights Act, demonstrating the direct conflict between state and federal law. The MPA has explicitly stated they have no intention of modifying their policy to comply with the federal executive order, setting the stage for a potential legal battle over jurisdictional authority and civil rights protections. This standoff raises complex questions about federalism, civil rights, and educational policy. Maine's educational institutions face a challenging decision: either comply with federal demands and potentially violate state law, or maintain their current policy and risk severe financial and legal consequences. The situation exemplifies the broader national debate over transgender rights in sports and the challenges of balancing inclusive policies with competitive considerations. The 10-day deadline creates immediate pressure for resolution, though the specific consequences of non-compliance remain somewhat unclear. The situation has implications beyond Maine, potentially setting precedents for how similar conflicts between state and federal policies regarding transgender athletes are resolved across the country. It also highlights the challenges educational institutions face when navigating competing legal frameworks and civil rights protections. The outcome of this confrontation could significantly influence educational policy nationwide. Other states and institutions are closely watching how Maine responds to this federal pressure, as it could shape future approaches to transgender athlete participation in school sports. The resolution of this conflict may establish important precedents for balancing federal authority, state rights, and civil rights protections in educational settings. The situation also underscores the broader societal debate about inclusion, fairness, and rights in athletic competition. As educational institutions grapple with these complex issues, they must consider multiple stakeholders' interests, including transgender students, cisgender athletes, parents, and educational administrators, all while navigating the complex legal framework of federal and state regulations. This case represents a critical juncture in the ongoing national conversation about transgender rights in sports, federal versus state authority in educational policy, and the practical implementation of civil rights protections. As the deadline approaches, the response from Maine's educational institutions will likely have far-reaching implications for similar policies and disputes across the United States.